And for more on the fighting in eastern Ukraine, I'm joined by Kenneth Yalowitz. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Belarus and Georgia and worked in Moscow during his time with the Foreign Service. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador.
Thank you, Elaine.
What is the significance of Debaltseve? Why are rebels claiming it isn't part of the ceasefire agreement?
Well, Debaltseve is a very strategic railroad junction, and if the rebels took control of it, they would in effect join Luhansk and Donetsk, these two, sort of puppet republics that have been set up. So their aim is to, sort of consolidate and link up and make these areas a more cohesive existence, if you will.
So why wouldn't it be part of a ceasefire agreement? One would think that you're talking about all the parts in question here.
Exactly, and that was one of the vagaries, one of the things that was left unclear in Minsk the other day. The rebels at that point said that they weren't going to observe a ceasefire there, and that's exactly what they've done. And as I said, I think what's going on here is that they are trying to ensure military superiority, in the area, and to take advantage of the fact that they've been resupplied by the Russians with heavy equipment and military supplies.
You have the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany meeting last week, coming up with a so-called political solution. Why isn't that working? No one seems to be listening to any of these leaders. So what do you think it will take for both sides to actually observe and honor a ceasefire?
That is a very good question. What is really unknown right now is what are Mr. Putin's end goals here. Is it simply to consolidate, as I've suggested, or do they want to take the port of Mariupol and have a land bridge to Crimea? This is a very dangerous situation. Russia, has violated all kinds of post-Cold War security arrangements, and we really don't know what the end goal is. Unfortunately, the one thing that's being talked about a lot now is to provide defensive equipment to Ukraine. And I have little doubt if Debaltseve should fall and there's a slaughter of Ukrainian troops, that's going to be very top on the agenda, because only by providing this defensive equipment would the Ukrainians be able to, they're not going to be able to defeat the Russians, but be able to stand firm and make it much more difficult for them.
A lot of the Europeans really don't agree with that idea. But what about the international observers being denied access to reach these conflict zones as part of the ceasefire? How can they really oversee something that they cannot get to?
The real problem is what you're really lacking here is a fully agreed ceasefire agreement that has teeth to it, that has implementation procedures. This one does not. And sending in the OSCE on our monitors is a good idea, in principle. But when there's no agreement on the ground as to what the procedures are going to be, for example, the agreement in Minsk did not specify that Ukraine would have control of its border until other conditions were met at the end of the year. It's going to be almost impossible, for Ukraine, to fulfill this agreement if the Russians continue providing, materiel and men coming across the line. So the flaw, if you will, is in the ceasefire agreement, which was very general, not specific, and really did not have teeth to it in terms of implementing.
So do you think it's back to the drawing board then? Do you think these countries have to come together and come up and either clarify or start all over?
I think what needs to happen here is that there has to be a very determined Western response on this. As I said, military equipment to Ukraine is not going to solve the problem, but I'm afraid a lesson or a message has to be given to Mr. Putin that the West is determined that his reckless behavior is not going to continue.
All right, Ambassador Yalowitz, thank you so much for joining us from the U.S. state of Virginia.